You're listening to the _Transformation podcast, your practical guide to business transformation.
Welcome to the _Transformation podcast. This is episode 13. My name is Joe Ailes.
My name is Jason West.
And together we're the founders of _.
So today I'm joined by Nick Ranier. Nick's a senior transformation leader with 25 years experience across the energy, defence, engineering and distribution sectors. He was a member of the bunker team that set in motion the build of the UK's 2 new aircraft carriers, and he led the development and operation of an award-winning campus for a world-leading defence, security and aerospace business. Nick and I actually previously worked together. Nick was heading up the corporate transformation portfolio office, and I was leading a multi-year HR and business planning transformation program. It's a real pleasure to spend time again with you, Nick. So
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Jason.
No, well, thank you very much for coming and agreeing to take part in our podcast. Today we're going to be talking about the scoping phase of business transformation. But before we get into that, it would be really great just to hear a bit about your background in your own words and just where you've touched on transformation in the past 25 years.
Yeah, well, I won't go back 25 years. I think that could take the duration of the meeting. But certainly to go back a few years, really the background, the basis for my interest and work in transformation comes from HR, being an HR manager and director. Initially for in British Aerospace, and then over to a company called Alstom on the transport systems side. Yeah, and I think all the time as an HR director, you're looking at, of course, your capability baselines, your organisational baselines, your referentials. You're doing your governance across the organisation. There's always things to adjust, and as new leaders come and go, they always have new ideas. They always want to change things. So I think from very, very early on, I've been involved in transformation and change. And then as an HR director, transitioning into to Thales, where we worked together for many years. It was a genuine pleasure, Jason. I can say that officially. I can get on record. Genuinely was a good time, actually. I think we were, dynamic, sort of growing, classically dynamic and growing, but that took a lot of effort and work. Yeah. Some of it was... a lot of it was organic. Some of it was through acquisition. And I think the organic stuff was really interesting around we built, certainly on my side, maritime services. And again, international work, unifying management leadership teams, and then below that, optimizing, unifying structures, looking at the operating models. So all of that gave me an interest, really, more in programs and change management. I realised that was really what I wanted to do. Yeah. So from there onto the carrier, into a bunker, as you've described. It literally was a little bit like that as we were going through the concept and development phase of that program. Then left that to set up the campus at Crawley for a couple of years, and then from there into transformation. With Thales at the corporate level, looking after the portfolio. Yeah. And then from there, it was a fantastic platform for working with a number of clients in multi-industries, and that's what I've been doing ever since. So, yeah, very interested to talk about this topic with you from my practical perspective.
Yeah. And what was it like making that transition from kind of operational HR director to transformation lead?
I think that's a really great question, because I think as an operational HR, you're in the function, leading a function normally that needs to change itself. So whilst you've got a transformation oversight role, really you're more concerned about making sure your organisation balances its business continuity and delivery and service delivery with that of the transformation needs. Yeah. And so therefore, within, as an operational HR leader, or indeed any operational HR manager, you're always going to be finding that balance. And I'm sure we'll talk about that in the course of this discussion. But switching to transformation, all of a sudden, you're the person having to offer that framework to the organisation in which they manage that balance. And I think the other dimension that you need to really be aware of course, is the strategic one, the goals that you're trying to achieve. Yeah. Normally from a multi-centric, as in multi-program perspective, not just the large single programs, but what all of the bits add up to. And then making sure also in that agenda that you're keeping a watchful eye on the culture and how that evolves and develops in line with what you want to do operationally and strategically. Yeah. So I think it's all about sort of frameworks and and guidance and stakeholder leadership management and facilitating the governance. And then within the function, it's just about delivering and owning all of those changes and benefits.
So one thing I'm particularly keen to understand really is your perspective coming at this more from the overarching portfolio level. So we've done a lot of work at a program level and making significant change happen within individual functions. And the scoping checklist that we created is very much written from that program perspective. The target audience are kind of HR, finance, procurement leaders that need to transform their functions. But obviously, what we're not really covering in that is that portfolio view. So I'm kind of really keen to see where the similarities and the differences are. So as we kind of delve into the checklist, we did start with what we thought was the most important thing, which is sponsorship. So executive sponsorship of the change. And we've seen lots of issues in sponsorship in various programs, but when it works, it's fantastic. It makes everybody's life easier. But I was really keen to understand what your perspectives were on sponsorship, what makes an effective sponsor, and what are the sorts of things that people should avoid.
Yeah, I think so. Sponsorship, I mean, they obviously own the business case, and the key to the good sponsorship is that these individuals are available to the program. Yeah. So I think there are examples of their sponsors, and you may see them at steering group meetings, and that's basically their intervention. So I think what you want from a sponsor is that availability, that ownership, and also they're prepared to actually go to the level of the organization that requires some interrogation. So they kind of, if there are problems, issues, actually they take the time out just to dip into that occasionally. And the spark effect that has is remarkable.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think just sitting there in a steering committee, receiving the reports, casting judgments, is okay. But the active sponsor is really what you're looking for, the active and engaged sponsor.
And is there a difference if somebody's sponsoring an overarching transformation portfolio, if they're the executive sponsor, which you would assume would almost certainly be the CEO, maybe the COO in certain cases, but does that require different things at the portfolio level?
It does. So each program will have its own steering group.
Mm-hmm.
It's a suggestion. You don't have to do it like this. There are options, but normally within the program, you'd have your own gates and your own process and your own steering group, which is fine. So if that's the major moving element in the organization at a given time, then that's absolutely fine. But I think normally within so the company I'm currently with, an energy business, I think there's 700 programs operating at the moment. Now, I'm not suggesting that any one person could understand the dependencies associated with that. But what I think that most prudent businesses need to do as part of their governance is just on a piece of paper, and it can be done, is plotting the value chain on the horizontal. Mm-hmm. So and it could be simple. So it's just inbound logistics, operations, outbound logistics, services, and then placing your R&D, sales and marketing efforts and development efforts as well onto that plot line. And then draw the businesses down the vertical and just make a little note of where they're active on that value chain. Yeah. Yeah. And I think, and then you can see at a glance, for example, HR normally are tinkering with capability. Yeah. They're normally transforming themselves. Yes. Endlessly. Procurement will always be doing something around key commodities, sourcing from new products for new markets, whatever it might be. There'll be maybe some new concept work, new development work, new services development work, which is a hybrid between business as usual, but there's a transformational element to it. Yeah. That is to say, the business in its current configuration with its current resources would not be able to deliver that change. So you need additional resources, additional effort, and it has all the components for a transformation of strategy, operating model, and culture. If it's just a simple change, then I probably, for simplicity, wouldn't necessarily track it at that level, but obviously you have to track it at some level.
Yes, yeah.
So I'm talking at you, but essentially what I'm trying to describe is a plan on a page.
Yeah.
And you can give some maturity to those. So, for example, if you're doing work in production with the operating model, you're introducing an ERP element or an improved material flow element. Just mark that on the on the map. If that then extends into distribution and then into services, then continue to draw that line so you can see the extent, the operating model and the business model extent of the changes, and you can see the significance of how all the changes work together.
Yes.
And then you get a sense of what's going on in the business, what the cadence of all that is, what it's all adding up to, and how your program fits into that context and what it's adding to those other programs as an enabler, if that's correct, and what it's adding to the strategic vision. So what I've just described sounds really complicated, but it's not. Once you've got that piece of paper, you just need somebody, a portfolio lead or a responsible executive who has somebody that can do that work from a programmatic perspective.
Yeah.
Pulling that information together and having that discussion with the board on a regular basis, making sure that those strategic dependencies and that direction of travel is managed.
Yes, yeah. So just having that real clarity of where we're going, where the value is in this business and what we're doing to improve it and how all the different moving parts do actually fit together.
If they do, indeed.
If they do.
Sometimes they conflict, of course.
Yeah.
If you've got restructuring in one part of the business or you're needing to optimize certain aspects and then yet you're being expected to grow and develop services in certain markets, there's always there's that debate, there's arbitration required, and that's really where the executive board and the CEO need to step back and decide what slows down, what speeds up, and what drops off, and what comes in, and that should actually be that actually should be a dynamic.
Yeah.
If you're looking at the same thing month in, month out over a year, then probably not having the right conversations.
Yeah, so I guess one of the challenges for a sponsor at that portfolio level is obviously it's the arbitration, as you mentioned, but if they get sucked into too much of the detail of individual programs, they could end up stepping on the toes of the executive sponsors of those programs and getting too much in the detail.
And that's why you do want sometimes your sponsor, as senior as they are, to dip into their own program and understand certain and relevant levels of detail.
Yeah.
So I'm not suggesting they sort out every conflict of priority and resource, but they do sort out where, for example, some businesses that are pilot organizations, for example, aren't ready or are not making progress towards readiness. So, business readiness is a key component of all of this to make sure that they can undertake what they're expected to do. And that should be facilitated by the sponsor. Normally, the program manager has seniority, has influence, but really the call needs to be made by the sponsor actually engaging with the pilot business and actually facilitating them to allocate the necessary resources and effort to make it happen as it should.
Yeah.
Test whatever's going on, whatever you need to test in terms of is it successful? Does it need adjustment? Then you're ready for a larger and wider scale deployment. And at that point, the exec board would get involved, certainly.
Yeah.
That sort of when you go multi-geography, multi-business line, they would just need to make sure, are we ready and what other things might that impact or affect in terms of our the year and for the business sales and financials and also the other transformation efforts.
Yes, yeah, and all those just the resource requirements of making all this change happen at once and making sure you don't damage business as usual as you've got multiple programs trying to get various new systems and processes live.
Absolutely, and the business, rightly so, should always. There's a differing view about this, but my view is the business always has the priority. So if there's a critical business delivery, it always has priority over the change or transformation. Yeah, it's not unusual to see steps taken to reverse that, but I think it has a detrimental effect. It creates almost disbenefits for the changes that you're trying to create. It harms the branding of that development, that product, that introduction.
Yes.
So the business has to make the call, but they just need to have and articulate the right reasons for any delays or changes or issues.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you sort of you touched on that real active sponsorship, and it's something we very much advocate, especially when you're looking at, well, what's the actual problem we're trying to fix with this transformation?
Indeed,
you've got your exec sponsor, but do we agree that this is a problem that's worth fixing, and how do we actually go about defining that problem before we rush into solution design? So I was kind of interested in your perspective on the sorts of approaches, tools that you've seen work around that kind of problem definition space.
So certainly it starts off with a sense that something's not great or not optimized. And I think then all of a sudden people then start to dive into try and start to define that problem, and I think that the team that does that work, I think the capability of that team. So normally it's left to with it. So if there's a problem within a function, if procurement recognise their benchmarks and parametrics aren't what they should be, or they feel they should be making a greater contribution to working capital or to the margin. So they'll then start their investigation. But I'd say in terms of that phase, the business analyst role, I think, is really key. I know it seems like a strange thing to say, but there's lots of views that are circulating around about what the problem is. And very often those views are diluted by the lack of data.
Yes.
And information. So having fantastic BAs who are kind of engaged, fantastic at what they do, and who own literally the problem definition they're trying to resolve, and then constantly feed that information into a sponsor who then feeds it into colleagues, and that then gets tested and adjusted.
Yes.
And whilst you do need speed, it needs to be done. This phase certainly needs to be done properly, because then everything builds on the back of what you think is wrong and what needs to happen.
Yeah.
So it's just, like I say, my kind of learning has been is get the best business analysts you can on the job.
Yeah.
You don't need a lot of them. I'm not talking about armies of business analysts, but just based on the scope and the scale, just resource it commensurately with great people.
Yeah. Certainly really great business analysts are very hard to find.
They're
a rare commodity.
Because they answer very precise questions normally.
Yeah.
And what you want is somebody who, him or herself, is challenging what you think the problem is and taking potentially quite a slightly different perspective on it, but with data, with information,
yes,
with insight that's gathered from leaders and staff alike.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that piece on data and insights, and you mentioned benchmarking.
Yeah.
And have you found that's been useful as you've been defining problems, and where do you go for that sort of benchmarking data?
Well, if you pitch up without the benchmark, you're gonna be sent away to get some. That's what I think you all know that from your own experience. Yeah. And I think again the benchmark data. I can't remember who you work with, but certainly Expert HR is somebody I've worked with. In the old days, Saratoga was somebody,
yes,
and it's so there are a few reference points and benchmark providers out there, and those listening to this cast within their own functions or businesses will know for their industry or sector, who they are, and I would definitely suggest. Now, you'd stop short perhaps of using the consultants associated with that data. You don't need to do that. You just need to draw on the database.
Yes.
Hopefully there's no strings attached or tied to that. Because you should be able to do it for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. The key thing is getting access to the data, as you say.
It really is. And just, if you're part of, very often you can do some peer work with people from other industries and sort of casually ask the question. But really, it's best to use pay the money, just get the benchmarking insights compare and contrast that with the current state, and then come up with a direction of travel and the gap, and just assess the gap you're trying to close, really.
Yeah, it tends to be essential to getting funding for the rest of the scoping project is actually being able to say, we're here against a global benchmark, and if we got to, we're at 25th percentile now, if we got to average, then there's X million on the table. Can we have a bit more cash to kind of figure out the next stage?
People shy away because normally you do the benchmarks. It's sort of FTE ratios of sort of HR people to staff, and I remember when we were starting to look at those in Thales, for example, they weren't great. They're significantly better now. They're probably up with the best of them now. But at the time, and you think, do we really want to say this? Do we really want to say just what we're running with, and what the best in class are running with in terms of FTEs, or as a percent the effort of the organisation as a percentage of sales, or whatever it looks like? You have to sort of gird your loins, if you don't mind me saying it, and then just say it as it is.
Yeah. And we're back to sponsorship.
We are back to sponsorship.
Having those hard conversations with people.
And they will shape then the case around that in a way that makes most sense for consumption by the executives. And then it gets into further shape, of course, for approvals. But it just needs to go through that maturity, doing the internal checks, getting a view on that, comparing the benchmarks, getting a view on that, shaping the case of the gap and where you potentially would need to go, shaping that, and then crystallising it in a business case.
Yes.
Then just dive straight to the business case, I think.
Actually gather some evidence, understand where you are today.
The evidence, and then socialise and check it at every stage. So, because going to the business case is normally just too big a surprise for the organisation to handle. It's just like all of a sudden you appear out of nowhere and say, we need 5 million over 2 years and it looks like this. And we think we're going to get these benefits. And of course, it's too much. So just work, just carry people with you as you go.
Yes. And one of the areas that we find we get quite a lot of pushback, kind of to your point on that requirements gathering piece, is where you've got a function, and it doesn't matter if it's finance, IT, procurement, HR, they all tend to be really quite resistant to engaging people outside of their function and engaging people close to the customer and the revenue stream. Our own perspective is if you don't really engage that diverse group of people, you're not actually going to properly understand the problem you're trying to solve. And there could be some pretty serious gaps. But I don't know if you've found that in kind of other places, other programs, and what you might have done to overcome that sort of resistance.
Well, I think the key, there's not necessarily, because really transformation and change is actually at its heart a reconfiguration of power, right? So therefore, every time you have these conversations, the bulbs are flashing in somebody's head about what does it mean for me and my department and my team. So that's the first filter that you're getting. So, and then the second filter that I find is that people sometimes who ask the questions are asking actually functional requirement questions. And they're getting functional requirement answers. So the person will say, I don't care what you do, but it must print to that printer or something ridiculous like that, which is a functional requirement. But so what you're looking for is a business requirement. And if you have a business requirement, try and deal with up front with the power issues by the way that you present and introduce your session. Is to say this is very much an exploration. Nothing has been decided. We know we've got this problem in the organisation. I think we're seeing it as very much as a collaborative effort to fix it, et cetera, et cetera. So there's things that you can say just to soothe the brow. And then you start asking business questions and expecting business requirement answers. And I think that's key. If it's a new CRM solution, then you're going to, the way you articulate your growth plans and ambitions into which markets with which products and which services, and therefore the CRM solution needs to capture a certain pipeline in a certain way to give you this information so that it feeds this prospecting chain of events from business development through to marketing through to the sale. So I think that's a very structured business conversation to have. What you don't want to do is talk about the types of reports that they're going to get, the colours of the pie charts and all this sort of thing. But it can happen, and you see it all the time. There's sort of hundreds of functional requirements. And then from the business requirement, that will then allow you to source ideally and hopefully something that, if it's not out the box, something very relatively close to it, because as soon as you get into a high level of functional requirements and certain levels of detail, all of a sudden you're into a customized product. And then you're in a whole world of trouble regarding just getting a minimum viable proposition out the door. So just starting to work with something very quickly, and then working in a whatever the agile sprints, whatever you do to then upgrade and evolve the product through phases and over time, that's probably the way to go. Again, based on what value it's giving to the business in its current configuration, and what increased value you could get from further enhancements or changes based on the business value question.
So we talk about it in terms of capability requirements. So I'm assuming this is analogous to sort of your definition of business requirements, in that a capability requirement can actually be a requirement for system functionality, but it could equally be requirements around changes to the capability of people, the operating model. It could be about process, it could be about policy, and actually structuring your requirements gathering sessions so you are capturing that broad sweep of these are the capabilities we need to deliver to the customer, whoever the customer might be.
Indeed.
And not limiting it just to the technology functional requirements.
Indeed. Yeah, I can understand. So I can certainly understand that capability question. And I think, especially when you've actually got, if you're in the human resource management information space, there's limited options. There always have been.
Yeah.
When I was at DS Smith, they went through this process of, they were reconciling their global headcount numbers, for example, using spreadsheets. But this is a company that's growing kind of 10, 15% a year. So it's like they're a successful business, but sometimes, as we all know, the practices. So you have to talk about, we need a capability that gives us a consolidated report, or an automatically produced consolidated report from all of the regions, and you have to sort of talk about some of those things. So whilst they obviously doesn't directly align to a business to a business strategy or benefit, obviously there is benefit to the fact that you have that reporting available, and you can then leverage it for whatever purposes you wish to. So there was a lot of detail that was discussed. But then it did get a little bit over-egged, frankly. Yeah, and I think that there does come a point where you just you do draw your line, you get the specialists in, and then you start to do your contest as to decide, okay, so what solution then delivers those business requirements, organisationally and systemically. Yeah, and then that's when you think you should start to get into that second level of detail and avoid it up front.
Yeah, because that's something that we found over the years is whenever you go out and you engage the business, you do get a huge amount of requirements, hundreds of requirements, because often it's the first time anybody's turned up and said, what do you think? What do you want? What do you need? And you actually have too many. And if you were to accept them all, you'd end up with a program that would last years and years and years. And they last years anyway, but tens of years. So we've found that actually there's some really important decisions that you have to make during the scoping phase about what to accept in scope and when you're going to accept it in. Is it phase 1? Is it phase 2? Is it phase 3? And we'll get to this, I'm sure, in governance. But actually putting some real design rigor, some real thinking behind which one of these are we going to accept? And because not every requirement is valid. It's a former colleague described it as it's a penny in a slot. So everyone's got a penny, and everyone has to have their requirement. And they're not all valid.
And they all feel obliged to spend their penny, of course.
Yes,
because you've got to. That they see that as an important demonstration of their contribution, of their commitment. So, so they make points for points' sake. Yeah. Sometimes I'm being slightly unfair there, but.
Oh, I'm sure it happens. So I'm sure we'll revisit that. Now we're going to switch gears slightly, and we're going to talk about change because we've both held operational roles in the past, and there's been far too many occasions when the first you hear about something is you must turn up to mandatory training for this new system process. The group of it's always group's fault. that's the first thing. Always group's fault. And they, you just as a lowly user or as a manager or a director in a business unit somewhere, you just get told you got to go to training. So we come with those scars on our backs, and
that's how you do Workday, isn't it? Surely, come on.
A Workday, or any system. You just go, good news, we're rolling out tomorrow. You might get some training if you're lucky. But what we found that doesn't actually work that well. The result tends to be, people don't adopt new systems, or they do it grudgingly and badly, and you can end up with all sorts of policy breaches and just people ignoring stuff and lots of back office workarounds. So we've always advocated the really preparing for a change right up front. So assume that your transformation program is going to get approved, and you need to start some work on your change management before you actually start implementation as part of the scoping. I'm just kind of keen to get your perspective as somebody that's worked extensively in change. Do you have a preferred approach? What's the minimum requirement you'd see as that kind of change readiness before you actually get to, finally signing the business case off and getting started?
Okay, I mean, that's so broadly speaking. You've listed in your really insightful document actually that you've listed, I mean, Lewin and sort of unfreeze and refreeze. So you've got the 3 steps of Lewin. You've got Cotter in there, I think, and you've talked about ADCAR as well, which is the ProSci, which is a commercial solution, but it's very popular, big in the US. But what they're all talking to though are these phases, and so at the highest level you've got a design, develop, and deliver type technical process going on. And underneath that, you need to complement and integrate into that an embrace, adopt, and sustain cycle. So if you look at, when you talk about embrace and on top while the development's going on, that's when you really theoretically should be doing your first engagements. Sometimes there's sensitivity in transformation and change. So you're designing a restructuring or an operating model, and obviously you're working with leadership, but you're not necessarily working with a wider organization. Because you're setting hairs running. There are changes and adjustments that will come. And as I said, it's a reconfiguration of power. And indeed, there may be other consequences that we all know all too well about. But let's imagine it's a development, a deployment of something like Cooper in procurement, which is indirect materials, or it's Workday or SuccessFactors, whatever it might be. So ideally, you would then, once you've got the business, so based on a successful sign-off of a business case and successful sign-off and approval of the resources and a plan, then you would start your early engagement. So so senior leaders and probably selected managers are already aware of what's going on because they've been consulted and discussed and they're engaged with. But in terms of the wider workforce, the impacted communities, we call it, you would then definitely need to start to talk to them about the direction of travel, the timescales, the type of help and support they're going to get to manage the transition. In parallel with that, and frankly, just before that, I always like to do a high-level change impact assessment as well. So you look at across the impacted community, you see where the most impacts are going to be, what capability is changing, what does the headcount profile look like in different parts of the process, are geographies involved? Do we need to consolidate activities? Do we need to federate activities? So all of that change impact, that then moves into a change action plan. This is classic stuff, but important to do and often forgotten. And then you also align to the change action plan. The comms plan will then be guided and influenced and informed by that change action plan. So where there is sensitivity within certain communities, then you should be aware of that, and shouldn't stop you doing anything. You have to go in, be transparent, talk to them about changes, what that means, and how they'll be helped and supported through that process. So you go for so you're doing your change management, and then of course all of this is it's basically communication updates, engagement updates, managing frequently asked questions, all the classic stuff. And I think the bigger the change, the bigger the story needs to be. The more people that are impacted, the more story you need, and less technical detail. Because it's the only way you can touch hundreds, sometimes thousands of people. So I think the comms, and having a fantastic comms person to help you with that as well. Again, a bit like the business analyst, this is another one of those roles where a great comms person will absolutely transform your transformation and use the channels. So where I currently am in Shell, they use Yammer a lot. and they use Stream a lot. So Yammer is a social network, internal social network. And, you're encouraged to join. I mean, I'm a member. I've only been there, 4 months. I'm a member of, I think, about 25. So it really is. It's a tricky thing to onboard, actually. Yeah. But that's the way they do it. And the Yammer channels are a major element of the communication. They also use Skype for Business. So you can reach out to individuals, teams or groups on that, and people are pinging you all the time, so it's just a way of working, and all companies will be moving in this direction, particularly as the millennials, come into the workplace, take over more senior roles. You can see this kind of internal social engagement revolution going on quite rapidly now.
I think the key thing there, it's a conversation
through whatever channel that don't let geography get in the way of that conversation. That's the key. If the channel is facilitating and helping out, fine. If it's not, then get it done face to face as quickly as possible.
Yeah. And it's that true two-way communication rather than just emailing people or just pushing messages.
Yeah, again, large scale change. It's tricky business, and that's why you need a great comms person who kind of gathers together the themes, grabs those themes and provides responses to those themes, and makes sure actually the change community, because that's their job, whilst the technical community get on with the product development and deployment, the change community, it's their job to onboard all of these points that are emerging from the impacted communities where possible, and actually addressing those points and concerns. Yeah. Then finally, you go for that cycle. Then finally, you are into are you ready to onboard the changes? So we need to do some training. We need to do some piloting. We need to do, early adopters, whatever it looks like. All of that needs to be done. You need people to help you through UAT, the testing phase. So all of those elements then need targeted comms while you're dealing with the main impacted community. There's always a few within that impacted community that need to be accelerated through, because they're the ones that do the testing, that do the early adoption, that test out and check the solution for validity, give the confirmations to the leaders, who then give their affirmation that they're happy that this is the right thing for the business to do and that they will onboard it. So so you're doing that early engagement and all the rest of it with those super user type and testing type communities. You're getting leadership affirmation on readiness, and then you can start your major training, and then follow through into the go live preparations, go live cutover, and whatever you call hypercare, support, hypercare,
warranty, or
whatever it looks like, and making sure that's meaningful. So change has a role. Sometimes it kind of steps back in the hypercare phase, but that's actually the sustainment element is actually what it's all about. So you should lean into that phase.
Yeah. I think that gives an excellent overview of all of the things that you really have to think about and plan for as you're scoping this out. This isn't something that just waits to the end when you have to train people, and it kind of really brings it to life. So thank you for that.
And that's what I live every day. In fact, just today I was disappointing some people with some training that they hadn't heard about or realised. So we all get caught out, and all of a sudden we're doing exactly what I've just said. So it happens, and I took it, and I'm literally reaching out on Skype at the moment, and pleading for their apologies and frankly recovering that situation, making them feel good about it. We've pushed back training back a couple of weeks. I've explained to sponsors and execs why we're doing it, and we'll get it right for them.
They need to be ready to hear it.
If you've screwed up, don't carry on with the screw up. Just stop, take a breath. It's okay. Ask for permission. And unless it's really desperate in that. It's an event that has to happen because of certain arrangements, then take that breath, take the time out, get it right, and then go again.
You're listening to the Transformation podcast. This podcast is brought to you by the transformation capability specialists. To find out more, visit _group.com.
Before we move off the kind of the broad topic of methodology, so kind of keen to get your perspective on this whole kind of project, program, portfolio methodology. It's something that we focused on in the checklist because there's a real misunderstanding, I think, in a lot of functions in finance, HR, procurement, less so in IT, because they're kind of really, they've been leading these sorts of things for quite some time.
Weak on the change, though. Still weak on the change, even in great companies. Technical, the prototyping and technical development, fantastic.
Yeah.
But the change management is still weak. So it's this integrated nature of things. That's the key.
Yes, yeah, and we found just describing what is a project, what's a program, and what's a portfolio, and the differences between those three things and how they actually all link up together has been a bit of an eye-opener for quite a few people that have been actually sponsors for years on these things, but not really fully aware of exactly what it was they were sponsoring and what the different accountabilities were. I was keen to get your view, and you've shared it already on the IT side. How effective are functions in kind of the actually employing these sorts of methodologies, and if there's a gap, what could be done about it?
Yeah, I think everybody would agree that functions generally will avoid any kind of tool or framework that they'll basically rely on a calendar and some basic Excel and just sort of go marching off towards the light as they see it. The way that we provide a framework to businesses is quite important, and normally within themselves they're not going to do it. So you actually have to be managing outside of the function that's undergoing the change, or the business is going to change, or the organization or the corporation that's undergoing the change. Outside of it, I think that there is definitely a case for managing a light type of program management organization. If you're running multiple programs, as in you've got an SAP running, you've got an operating model change running, you've got a sales transformation program running, some product development going on, some footprint consolidation, sites consolidation, all of these different. That's a portfolio where you've got these very different things happening, which is back to my original point of put them on a bit of paper so you can understand that that these two sites are one site's going to close, another site's going to consolidate. So don't bother deploying an ERP to it, in 3 years' time, because there's going to be nobody there. Yeah. So it's like these basic things sometimes get missed. So that's the portfolio elements. Then with each of those, as I said, for an ERP or procurement operation program, the program itself is the sum of the different parts that would need to change within a function. So if procurement are doing some capability changes, they're onboarding like I said, like Cooper, sort of an indirect sourcing tool or whatever it might, or a component of an ERP, SAP HANA, for example, on purchase to pay, those changes. So that would be the program, and the projects are those individual work streams. And what you would need is definitely somebody just sat outside, just doing a light version of program management. So there's more and more aversion to managing programs. I have to say, it's not people aren't welcoming or onboarding methodologies. They're actually increasingly resisting methodologies, I think. So I think it's got to be the lightest form you can make it. So I'm MSP qualified and management of portfolio qualified, but it's very rare, if ever, that I deploy a full MSP suite. I mean, they do it in defence in MOD, with the consequence effects that they're trying to manage an unmanageable baseline of things. They've got all these schedules, risk and dependencies, and the issues log and the actions log and the schedule, and they've got all of these activities, the resource profile, the work breakdown, the organisation breakdown. They're trying to manage this baseline of things. Can you imagine? Yeah. And just organizations are totally resistant to that. So it's basically, you need a schedule, you need some basic management of risks, issues, and dependencies. Sometimes it's called a RAID, risks, actions, issues, and dependencies, or sometimes it's risks, assumptions, issues, dependencies. The blend can change just depending on what the organization would like to focus on. But certainly having an idea of the schedule and reporting the schedule and the associated risks is still an important thing to do. How an organisation uses that, so for example, if you're going through an HR transformation, so they're doing a reorganisation, onboarding a new system, and doing some consolidation of support services or customer services, that management, as you know better than I do, was done for all of those customer groups, and you just need a representative from the business working with you in the team, normally on a shared job basis, and they would then carry back the schedule messages, the risk messages, and manage the various things that need to be managed through communication and the natural meeting cycle within the business. Yeah. So you don't walk around with a schedule and sort of bashing people over the head with a rolled up piece of paper, because you'll get short shrift on that.
I must admit, when I similarly did an MSP qualification, kind of went through it, I've now got some language to explain everything that we've been doing for the past 5 years. This is kind of fascinating. But actually, if we did all of this, we'd need an army. Yeah. We'd have to have an army of planners and schedulers, and we'd have to have project managers everywhere. And life just unfortunately isn't quite like that. It's interesting. People are kind of resistant to it, but it has massive value. But if you tried to do it all, if you're building a £2 billion aircraft carrier, I'm sure it's brilliant, but it's a real challenge if you're transforming a function. It's got to be appropriate, hasn't it?
Absolutely, and of course, if you're building a physical asset or a product, I mean, it lends itself much more to detailed planning than it would than transformation and change, because of the dynamic nature of what you're trying to change. Yes, yeah. Whereas once you've got your design, your bill of materials, your resource profile, you could basically get on with that production, cut steel and get on with it. But of course, it's organisation. You're not cutting. Organisation change doesn't start with cut steel, does it? It starts with a communication with people about what's changing, and all of that emotion and feedback coming in, dealing with all of that.
Yes, I do remember talking to some program managers in that defence space, explaining that our requirements are going to start off really small and they're going to get bigger and bigger and bigger as we go through the program. We're just going to uncover more stuff we don't understand yet, and we don't even know we don't know it, and kind of the look of horror on their faces.
But you have a job, so the organisation, it's gone through the process we talked about earlier on, and it's decided on a case for change, and it's committed to that case for change. In that process, hopefully the people you're talking to would have been involved. But I think a key service to them is what I call weak signals. So I think within all of this panoply of tools and methods, at the heart of it, you just need to make sure that a weak signal of an issue, so there's potentially an industrial relations issue there, or there might be a design problem there, or kind of or our current infrastructure won't be able to support this in terms of the performance of the required performance of the system. Whatever it looks like, there will be a point in time where an issue or a risk emerges. And then and then your experience then comes to the fore, is that you start talking to your sponsors, stakeholders, impacted communities about that weak signal, about how it could grow unless. Yes. And I think getting them engaged on things that are not tomorrow, but and I think having those conversations about the look ahead are really important. That's actually good and sensible program planning. I think what's very frustrating for businesses is that despite all of this effort, they're constantly being surprised. Yeah. Things are constantly changing at the last minute. Things aren't declared until everybody knows that it's not the case anymore. So we're going to go live next week and everybody knows it's not going to happen. So what's planning all about then, if you're constantly disappointing us and telling us things that don't seem to be the case? Yeah. So having those forward-looking conversations around a very simple schedule, but talking to them about particular issues and points they need to be aware of in their area, that if we can tackle them now, won't be an issue in 3 months' time, but they will be if we don't. So
it is an interesting one, because the balance between structure and plan versus creative problem solving is probably more towards the end of creative problem solving in a transformation. But if you don't have the schedule and plan and the structure, if you have none, then the problems are too big, too complex to actually.
It's the balance of the parts, isn't it? It's the balance, and not being a project manager that's driving something because the book says that it should be driven.
Yeah,
that's just not going to work.
Yeah, it's that difference between project managers and program managers. They are different breeds. One can become the other, but there's a fundamental difference between those.
And there's a role for both. There's an absolute role for both. Just assign the right type of person to the right type of project or program.
Yes,
if it's a very crystal clear, monocentric delivery, what I call, as in one thing with no particular major influences that you can deliver, then a certain type of program manager will actually drive that and get that over the line. Project manager, but certainly where there are dimensions of culture and process change and strategy, that's problem solving, creativity, and conversations all the time around a schedule.
Yeah, and a huge amount of influencing and emotional intelligence, and getting people to do stuff they don't actually really want to do.
I don't know, there'll be people screaming at the device you're listening to this on, saying, you need a schedule, it needs to be absolutely, that's the lifeblood of programs. And I couldn't disagree. But so often they're not telling us exactly what is happening. Yeah. So as long as they're not so sophisticated that we're able to tell the right story at the right time, then that's what it's all about.
Yeah. So have a schedule, but perhaps don't kind of over-engineer it, and recognise that it has its limitations, and there's plenty of grey areas that you're going to need to be playing in to get it delivered.
And the risk profile won't be able to swallow them all up either. Yeah.
So let's kind of again switch gears slightly and think about the end point. So actually working with the senior leadership team of the function, or in fact the enterprise at the portfolio level, to really define, what is our vision? What does that destination look like? How are we going to describe it? And what are those milestones along the way, those key objectives? And then the design principles that are going to keep us on track and keep us on course. What does kind of a good vision look like? And where have you seen things go off track if vision, objectives, and design principles haven't perhaps been thought about as effectively as they could have been?
So my preference really is to work with the strategy, I have to say, and I think so. The vision statement is a bold statement of intent. Yeah. But I think when you start to look at the strategy, as in we want to grow in the in the South American market by 10% in the next 2 years in this product or service. That's a strategic objective, and I think you can start to, and some of that will be delivered through business as usual, and the elements, and already when you're doing your strategic planning, you can start to get a sense of what won't be delivered through business as usual. And if it won't be delivered through business as usual, then how do you bring that additional capability and resource to the business, or that additional service that it needs? So that would be step one. So I think that within the strategic planning process, I think there should always be a review of what can be achieved, as I say, by existing resources and additional resources, and then start to work through that additional piece as a potential change management plan. Yeah, I think I do take your point about alignment to the vision, but it's just when you've got these strategic objectives, at least normally there's an element of measurement associated with them.
Yes, and there certainly should be.
So you've at least got a reference point for the program so you can actually say, based on the current glide path for sales, we're going to reach 80% of that target, and not in that market, and therefore, what does the other 20% look like? It's additional business development resource, or is it the fact that we haven't got the right products or services in there, or is it that we just, the sales team isn't big enough, or it's having trouble engaging. It's not the right, it's not integrated, not nationalized enough for that market. So whatever that looks like, you would need to introduce that as a change management, as a strategic change. Now, the sum of all these bits, so procurement will be doing the same thing, and finance and HR and operations, they'll all be doing the same thing. And I think the gaps in terms of their strategic ambitions would then start to form the bedrock for your change management efforts.
And that plan on a page.
And you get your plan on a page. And then from that, you would then start, some things will already be in motion within the function, I guarantee it. Yeah. And you might, if they're making traction and progress, leave them, then that's fine. But if they're kind of not making the progress, then probably needs that the structure, the framework I talked about. So step in, to lean into that, offer them the framework about how you start to really properly design out the changes they want to make, how you complement that with the change management effort required to deliver that, and then start that journey. And then before approval, just check it against the other things that are going on. Make sure there's no clashes of timing, cost, or dependencies.
Yeah.
So I think, and then all of these again, and then all the functions will have 2 or 3 year plans, hopefully baked into budgets. And one elegant way to do it, and I think we saw this as well in Thales, and certainly I saw it in Alstom and other companies, is that you have this sun in the top right of a page, which describes what we're trying to achieve for the business, to look and feel the business. Yeah. There's your vision, and then there's another layer, a corona around the sun, which has the metrics of contributing to that vision by function, and then you have the kind of the shafts of light emerging from it in different directions, and within each shaft of light, a function is describing its journey. It's 2 or 3 year. I mean, 3 years is getting a long time for transformation now. I mean, most companies have got the appetite for 1 or 2 years. So let's imagine it's a couple of years. And with some strong benefits in year 1 as well. And so those shafts are like quite practical programs and projects. And you've got the corona, which is talking about making sure that all of that is, the benefits are recognised and measured and tracked, and then all of that hopefully will add up to this glorious brightly lit vision.
I have to remember what those charts are called. They have a name, don't they?
Probably. I don't know. I just call them sunray charts.
That's probably what they're called.
It's times like this when a picture would definitely replace 1,000 of my words. But they're really useful. And again, such a good communication tool. Good for if you're able to share it, because some elements on the chart are sensitive, and some elements are very much within the domain and need to be managed and collaborated and delivered in that way. But it does help and inform how you definitely need to, the messages, the coherence of the messages across the business. So they don't want 15 different messages of each of these sunrays. They want the combined message of what's happening around the business, and then impacted communities. Then obviously within each of those rays of light would then need to be worked with as we've just described in this session.
So you've set your vision, you've got your nice sunray chart, and
whatever it looks like. Whatever it looks like.
You know where you're going and what the plan is to get there at that kind of high level.
And which sponsor sits on which sunray, what resources are allocated, what they're heading towards, the things they need to be aware of, colleagues they need to make sure they keep in touch with, contact with to manage dependencies. You've got a portfolio managing the whole, you've got program managers managing the parts, and you've got project managers managing the individual deliverables. So it's something, transformation and change can be something of an industry, and it's just the care is required to make sure it's not overcomplicated. People aren't overburdened, however, and that the cadence of all of this is such that the business can onboard what is coming towards them.
And that brings us neatly on to how you structure your decision-making around all of that. How do you govern that complexity, that industry of change that's going on?
So back to my point about strategic objectives. So every business is already running some kind of not just business. I'm not just talking about commercial, I'm talking about government as well. But they all should be running governance bodies. So there will be governance bodies that are looking at enterprise risk.
Yeah.
There'll be governance bodies that are looking at the organizational design, roles and responsibilities of directors. The various committees that are operating will have mandates.
Yeah.
So they need to be there will be governance bodies, governance sitting on these, and they should be. So I'll come to the point in a minute. Then there's, in terms of people, there's performance and reward. There's the compensation committees and things. And then lastly, of course, there's policies, procedures and processes that are run within maybe the quality team, but not only, and they're making sure there's good governance and process around the way that policies and processes change and adjust. So that's business as usual. Then all of a sudden, you're adding into that mix all of this transformation governance.
Yeah.
My advice always is to back to your plan on the page regarding what's changing in the business. There's obviously a plan on the page for what's happening as business as usual. And then sitting above the two parts, there should be all of those committees should be discussing at the same time. So within risk committee, should be discussing the daily business risks of of the way that the operation is running, but also they should be discussing the transformation risks within people and organisation, within the process and policy committees and whatever those structures look like that review and do the oversight. They should integrate as much as possible the transformation efforts into that coherently into the discussion.
Yeah.
So they sit and integrate with. So I'm being idealistic there because I know obviously not all companies and some of your sort of SME and smaller business customers will be saying, "Come on, get real. Do you think we do all that for a living?" But what I would say to them is, you will be looking at all those parts at some point of your governance and management cycle. And in that same meeting, in that same forum, ideally, you would introduce as well the notion that there are things are changing and what are the impacts on the things that you're discussing as part of your business as usual. So you may do them all once a month in the management committee. You may do all of those things once a month in 20 minutes at the end of a meeting. Yeah. But you should also have 20 minutes at the end of that meeting, which talks about the transformation and then the meaningful impacts and effects on continuity and also future plans and changes.
It's a fascinating idea, actually, because in a world where everything is changing at a faster rate, then how can you not integrate these transformation governance into your just business as usual? Does business as usual exist really anymore?
Well, so business as usual is just as long as you understand the scope of business as usual includes business that will change.
Yes.
So as long as you've got that in your head, that your oversight is over the whole effort of the business in that things those efforts that people are trying to make changes within, and also the things that we're just trying to deliver on a daily basis. Yeah. So it just makes practical sense because we're so overloaded and overburdened. And transformation, generally speaking, we always complain about it. It just doesn't, you're saying, have they made that decision yet? No, it's hopefully the next steerco, and you wait another 2, 3, 4 weeks. And, it can be frustrating. But as soon as you use the natural cycle of the business and you carve out some time, and you've actually got leaders that understand that they need to protect time for these subjects and discussions, you've got a chance of a coherent decision being taken. Yeah. Or you can run it on its own in a dark corner, of course, with your sponsor, which happens, and you make progress in that way. Yeah. There are consequences to that. Yes. Normally just before go live, where you get a surprise. So I just think that certainly as you move towards readiness, you should start to integrate the conversation. Yeah, certainly at that point, if not before. Yeah,
no, that's really interesting. I think that's going to be a topic.
I offer it. Again, there'll be people screaming now, so you get real. But that, I think it's always important to say, what in this complicated world with this fourth industrial age upon us, where we're in the third age, we were kind of looking at everything was connected within ourselves. Now everything is connected beyond ourselves. Yes. So all of those influences tipping into the business, customers able to engage directly with the business, change requirements in a heartbeat. Yeah. So you've just got to work with the natural cadence of the business on an increasing basis, or suffer the consequences of a flawed deployment.
Yeah. Salutary tale for us all. Yeah. And so the governance is going to be there making a set of decisions on things, products, solutions that the programs are kind of putting up for review and approval. And hopefully you're not pushing all of that stuff up to the executive steering committee. Otherwise, it probably is going to take you some time to get anything delivered.
No, absolutely.
But the actual process, the capability to design solutions is something that often ends up falling to really good operational managers. So when you go into these transformation programs, you're setting up process ownership for the first time and introducing that as a concept. Hopefully not. Hopefully that does exist. But generally, certainly what we found is that one of the biggest challenges is that you need to take people who are excellent at executing operationally and then having to get them to change their mindset to architecting, to designing, to thinking a bit like a system engineer about, I'm going to change this one thing over there and it's going to have this ripple effect, and really working through the consequences of that. And it's something that we've found is a significant risk to a lot of programs, is the key people that need to make those decisions are actually not all that well placed because they don't have the experience, the knowledge or the skills to do it. So if you were to have a magic wand and we could kind of sheep dip people through this kind of this development program or this training or whatever it's going to be, what are those kind of core things you would hope that your process owners, your design leads would have? And what can we do as transformation practitioners to make our own lives easier, but to make the transformations that we run more successful?
So again, I've come to the bitter conclusion that the internal subject matter experts, for want of a better term, because these are the people that you're turning to, invariably don't have, unless they're released, which can happen, just simply don't have the time or the energy or the behavior to work with you in an appropriate way. So I think, again, we're back to transformation and roling and capability. And I've talked about like the business analysts, like the comms, but there are just a few people that once they appear, everything changes. It's really dramatic. And I think the same applies to the functional consultant type role. And I think that if you're working with some production people on trying to figure out what an ERP, Oracle, SAP, whatever we would need to do, I think that I think having a great functional consultant do knowledge transfer is often, it's more expensive, but it's quicker and it's more effective, and they ask the right questions and they know what information has been gathered and is it sufficient, and what needs to be gathered, and what the quality of that is. They just have this sense. So I feel it's a tricky one, and I've seen both sides, but certainly the SAP exercise that I saw, for example, at DS Smith, they provided functional consultants into the finance area to really understand what was going on in some of these sort of purchase to pay, quote to cash type, sale to quote or sale to cash, whatever it looks like, type processes. And I think having a functional consultant working with SMEs within the business, extracting knowledge, and then extrapolating the ideas and not get. I think it's the blank paper that gives the internals the problem. And I think having a functional consultant, giving them some ideas on where their future of that process or could go, could lie, is really important. And then translating that into obviously functional requirements, then translating that into a specification, I think, is a process best led by people who do that. I think to save money, very often we do try and work with the internal resource, and some of them actually are surprisingly good at turning their hands to that. Actually, invariably within 2 or 3 years, you find them actually doing that job somewhere else. Actually, they just they've left and become a consultant somewhere else. Yeah, you earn how much? What do you do?
Yeah.
Yes,
that is the risk.
So I'm slightly off piste here. But I just think that's a smart way to go.
Yeah,
and it's an efficient way to go. And if you're scheduling, if you're conscious of the schedule, that will get you a result because they will do the work in prescribed time.
Yeah,
it's not 9 to 5. They'll be in early, they'll be out late, and they'll work with the SMA during the day, and they'll then turn that into whatever it needs to turn into, and they'll do a great job of that.
Yeah. So actually make sure in your business case you have enough backfill for those SME roles so they can spend time on this.
That's
but
true.
Also line them up with functional consultants that really understand what's happening out in the wider market, what technology can do, and they bring that external challenge and they can challenge constructively.
Yeah, so I mean, generally, I don't know what your experience has been, but for certain phases of the project, you're looking for them to be virtually available for 2 or 3 days a week, at certain phases, and then obviously they drop off while there's some designing and going on, and testing comes,
yes.
And all of a sudden they're 5 days a week on that. So I think they do drop in and drop out the profile, but as they go through these SMEs, they start off with functional consultants, and they work with with the test managers and specialists, and then they work with the sort of go live preparation. So I think just assigning people to them to work with them to guide and help them through, not just from a technical perspective, but also making sure that any change management messages are coming out as well. Any insights on changes to working practices, policies, all of that stuff is also extracted from those individuals and tested as well with leadership, of course.
Yeah.
So I think it's a case of working with them and taking as much as you can from them, because they will give you something, but I think knowledgeable people will be able to extract from them. Yeah,
it's something that we're seeing quite a lot with. It's more in the HR space than it is in the finance and procurement space, because the HR's been perhaps more on the kind of the cloud journey longer than certainly finance procurement. Actually, they're not that far behind on HR. For certain areas. But where you move to these cloud products, it's not like the old days where you'd spend 2-3 years implementing SAP or Oracle and then it would stay the same for the next 10 years. It's like these things update every 6 months, and you never go live with the full range of functionality that you've bought on day one. So there's always a roadmap, and the organizations that have been successful have bought this functional consultant, this solution design mindset and capability within their function, and they drive that roadmap, and they continue to develop and evolve and grow and transform. The ones that struggle are the ones that were perhaps too reliant on external consultants, or didn't release people, and they didn't build the capability internally. And they're the ones that kind of get stuck. They tend to be afraid of the product that they've bought. They've had consultants come in, change has happened, they've got a new operating model, they've got new processes, they've got a new system, but it doesn't quite work as they expect it to or want it to or need it to, but they're lacking the tools and the levers to pull and the skills to make the change happen. So we're sadly seeing this more and more. And I think the more we can do as transformation practitioners to bring that capability into these program teams right at the start of, actually start building it in scoping, then the more likelihood is that transformation will stick. There's no easy answer to it. We haven't got a solution just yet. We're working on it. There's a definite need from what we're seeing out in the market.
It's an interesting sort of insight you provide there. And I think as well, because regions doing the process with the same outcome, obviously there'll be cultural and sort of practice differences within regions as well. So I think having somebody that sat with you at the centre that's also knowledgeable enough to know what's going on in other places as well, and actually, so it's not just their local experiences about what they know of the wider business. So I think these are quite special and rare people.
Yes, and that's a good point. For the large businesses, you have to have your global process owners, but they need to be supported by country process owners or regional process owners. And that structure is something we actually did in Thales, funnily enough. But getting that embedded and making sure that's an enduring facet of the function that you've transformed is critical to the ongoing success of whatever benefits you've managed to achieve. Because it's too easy for stuff to degrade. The program team goes on to their next client or clients, and things kind of slowly drift apart if you've not really cemented that capability within the client. Yes, it's an interesting one. It's a thorny problem, but we keep trying on that front. So the final point now is really business case. So you've done all of this work. Yeah, you've spent the past 3, 6, 9 months, maybe longer, really scoping out this transformation. You've engaged the business. You've got your Sunray chart. You've got your vision. You're really clear on your governance. You've got enough of a plan together that it kind of hangs together. And now you need to present a business case to the board and ask them for a large number with many zeros in it. Yeah. So, what are the mistakes you can make with that kind of final presentation of a business case?
So the business case itself, the structure, I think companies and organisations, government departments, etc., are really good at producing business cases. I think they do it a lot, and they are very complete documents. I think the main issue really is of the benefits that are stated in the business case is how are we genuinely going to track those benefits? So, for example, if you are going to generate savings, what's the methodology to track savings through the P&L? Into the P&L, so you can actually identify those savings, and actually that's the industry that you need to engage in. So I think my reflections on the business case, as long as they're rounded documents that do describe the scope very clearly, articulate back to your point about what am I in charge of here, what am I responsible for here for. So that as long as that's articulated very clearly, and then below that scope, obviously there's a work breakdown that's associated with costs and a profile. There's risks associated with that, and even current issues. So all of those should be articulated in the business case. But again, you're starting to get into several pages now, and people, you're meant to be able to read this thing and understand it and on board the messages it's giving you and make approvals appropriately. So what I'd say is whatever the culture of the business case is, then let it be so, as long as it has those key elements. But I think what's often missed is the way that benefits associated with that business case are tracked. Yeah. And I think it's probably the weakest part of transformation change management is that part of the process. Yeah. So when we were in Thales, for example, we were trying to track savings in the P&L. We were actually targeting, but we started that halfway through the journey rather than having clear rules from the outset, clear methods and outset. So there are a number of methods and ways of people who thought they were identifying savings that we were making in the P&L. They were discredited or disreputed, and it became a real industry to do that. Yeah. So I think it's probably not what you're looking for, Jason. I apologise, but I think my only reflection on the business cases, they're normally pretty good. And as long as the scope is clear, you understand who the sponsor is, that individual understands intimately what he or she is expected to do, the resources they have at their control, the period of the business case is baked into budget. So if it's 1, 2, even 3 years, those figures are baked into budgets. Yes, they do need annual review, of course. Yeah. And then, but as I said, it's really the definition of the benefits and how they're tracked. Not after 1 or 2 years, but within sort of months, within sort of 3 to 6 months maximum, you then start to say, right, we're not expecting the benefits, but we are expecting to understand how you're going to identify and track them, and see that progress. So that's kind of the thing that often gets missed, is the business case is then filed away.
Yes, yeah. Locked in a drawer.
Costs move away. Timescales move away for all the good reasons that we've just talked about. Yeah. And people, kind of just trying to shuffle away from the benefits because, in some cases they can be embarrassing.
Yes. Yeah.
So good transformation won't allow you to do that. It will, if necessary, it will transparently re-baseline the program, revisit the benefits, and make associated decisions on that basis.
Well, funnily enough, I'm in the middle of writing the next checklist, which is on the build phase, and one of the points that I've made on that is that you don't just take your business case and put it in a drawer. But there are, that's one mistake. Another mistake is you just extract the costs from it, and you just kind of forget about the rest, and you turn your costs into your program budget, and off you go. But yeah, if you don't really pull those benefits out and put accountable people in place to say, okay, you're the person that's going to deliver these things, make it happen. That's going to feed your design. It just doesn't happen otherwise. You've got to make individuals accountable for the individual benefits in your business case.
Whereas projects I'm looking after now at the moment, people are saying to me, well, where's the original business? The classic cry, where is the business case? And you say, well, and 9 times out of 10, I'm saying, I haven't seen it.
Yes.
And it's not criticism, it's just what happens. It goes into the finance department, they rip off the finance annex, transfer, make sure the annex is the spreadsheet is translated into whatever software that they need to translate it into, and then the rest of it, as I say, becomes a legacy and archive document. It should be very much a live product, and actually the business case should become some kind of program management document. So everything that's in the business case should be embodied in some kind of program management document that describes for the sponsor and for anybody that joins the program what the program is trying to achieve, how it's going to do it, what their role in that is, etc. All nice to say. When it's done, and I do it, I've done it here, for example. It's worthwhile. It's worthwhile doing. But you do get, when you do ask some questions about the original business case 2 years down the road, say, what about that? There's a bit of a dismissive laugh, which is a shame, isn't it? So it says it all about sometimes where transformation can lead you. Yeah,
absolutely. No wonder there is a degree of cynicism around these things.
Rightly so.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's been a fascinating one. I've just looked at the watch here. It's an hour and a half we've been talking. Thank you again for all of the insight and the experience that you bring. And there's a lot of kind of really interesting new stuff in there as well. I'm going to have to find somebody that's going to violently disagree on one of these things. I think that's the thing. We've been far too, we've agreed with each other far too much, I'm sure. But it turns out there's probably some truth in that somewhere. Thanks for that, Nick. It's been fascinating.
It's been a pleasure. It could have been too bad. The Sandman's still awake. So
This podcast was brought to you by Underscore, the transformation capability specialists. To find out more, visit underscore-group.com. You can subscribe to the feed via your favourite podcasting app. You can contribute to the conversation via our WhatsApp group. And if you would like to feature in a future recording, contact us on social media to find out more.